In this session, we're going to be finding out about the social structure and organisation of ancient Rome. Now, ancient Rome had two different types of leadership in its time. It had a monarchy and it had a republic, and we're going to be looking at the difference between the two. So until 509 BC, Rome had been ruled by the Etruscan kings, the first of whom, according to the legend, was Romulus, the person who Rome was named after. Now, some of these kings had been good leaders, but others had not. And the last king to rule Rome was Tarquin the Proud. His real name was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. And Tarquin was a terrible king who abused his power and treated his people very badly. The people of Rome decided that they'd had enough of kings who were bad rulers, so the Roman revolt began. And eventually, King Tarquin was overthrown and a new Roman Republic was born. So the Roman monarchy was either a king or a queen ruling the country, and they were the only person who was actually in charge. So if they decided something, then that would happen. The people had absolutely no say as to how their country should actually be run. The Republic, now that was different, because it was a system of government that allowed certain people the opportunity to vote for who they actually wanted to be in charge and make the decisions for the rest of the country. A little bit like we have in the United Kingdom today, where we can go to the elections and we can vote for who we would like to be our Member of Parliament, and then they go to Parliament and they speak on our behalf. Now, every year elections would be held to decide who would become the new magistrates and who would be the new consuls. And every year 2 consuls were elected who ruled the country on the advice of the Senate. So they chose lots of people who were around them, and they were the great guide and lights for this. And they were only allowed to rule for 1 year, and the reason for this was to stop them from becoming too powerful. They only had 1 year to rule, then they were thinking about how to best serve their people who'd voted for them, rather than thinking about how to make their villas bigger and nicer. So how did the Roman Republic actually work? Well, the citizens of Rome voted for the consuls and voted on new laws that the Senate passed. Now, this Senate was made up of 300 people, and they were the ones who advised the consuls to help them make the right decisions. And 2 of these senators were chosen each year to be the new consuls. So when we were voting for people as the people of Rome, it was the Senate that we were voting for, the 2 that we liked most. So those 2 consuls who were in charge were elected each year by the people, and it was these consuls who then go and choose who's in the Senate. So imagine that you're living in ancient Rome at the moment. You have 2 consuls in charge this year, and those 2 consuls select 300 senators who are going to advise them on what to do, and they fill the Senate. Now, next year what's going to happen is you're going to look at those 300 senators, and you're going to vote for 2 of them, and 2 of them are going to be in charge. And those 2 who are in charge are going to decide which 300 people they're going to have to advise them. Now, some of them might be the same, some of them might be different. And then that will happen every single year, where you will be selecting 2 people from that Senate to be the people who are in charge, knowing that there's 300 people giving them guidance. However, not everyone could actually vote. There were different social classes in Rome, and only male Roman citizens could actually vote on who they wanted to lead the country. So if you were not a male Roman citizen, you had no voice. Now, in ancient Rome, there was lots of slaves, and the slaves had no rights and couldn't vote. Slaves were men, women, and children who were owned by richer Romans, and the only way a slave could vote was if his master bought his freedom, and in this case, he'd become a Roman citizen, known as a freedman. This, however, didn't happen very often. Above the slaves were the plebeians. Now, the plebeians were the ordinary working people of ancient Rome. Now, they couldn't become senators, they couldn't become magistrates, they couldn't become judges, but what they could do is they could vote on laws and they could vote on who they wanted to be the consul. Now, lots of plebeians were really poor, but there were actually some rich plebeians too. They could become very wealthy, but they were never able to move up the social ladder, and this was the reason because they were not born into a noble family. So it didn't matter how rich, how important these plebeians became, they would never get a chance to be a senator, a magistrate, or a judge, because the only people who could do that were the sons and daughters of the noble people. And these noble people were called the patricians. Now, patricians were the aristocracy of ancient Rome. So like today's modern day royal family, and they were people from the best families who were usually very wealthy. Patricians were the magistrates, the judges, the senators of Rome, and these jobs were usually unpaid, so you had to be wealthy to stand for office. You needed to have lots of money in the bank to allow yourself to do something that was voluntary. Patricians would often have houses in the town and in the country, and they'd have loads of slaves who would work for them. Now, in ancient Rome, no matter how rich or poor a woman was, whether they were a plebeian, whether they were a patrician, made absolutely no difference. Women were not allowed to vote. Women had very few rights in ancient Rome. A woman was under control of what was called the paterfamilias, the man of the house. This was usually a father, an older brother, or an uncle, and he would make the decision on who she would marry and controlled all the money that she actually had. Now later on, the Romans decided that they would like an emperor to rule over ancient Rome. So the system of government changed once again. We started with a monarchy with kings and queens. We moved to a republic where a senate guided the consuls. And now we're moving from a republic to an empire. The emperor had control over the empire and ruled with the advice of the senate. So it was mixing the two, the monarchy and the republic together, to give them this idea of the empire. Now, do you know any famous Roman emperors? Have you heard of any? Pause the video and think about which ones you might have known about. Now, there's a great number of Roman emperors. Some of them have some wonderful and fascinating stories behind them, and we're going to look at a few just now. Now, the first emperor we'll look at is Emperor Augustus, and what you'll notice about most of these emperors is that actually have completely different names in real life. He was born Gaius Octavius Furinius, and he then changed his name to Gaius Julius Caesar. Now, the reason why he changed his name was in honour of his great uncle who had been murdered, Julius Caesar. In 27 BC, the Senate actually gave him the title Augustus, so that wasn't actually his real name. It was a title which means the revered one. And Augustus was the first Roman emperor, and he wanted to end the corruption of the Senate and restore the Roman Empire to its glory. He'd seen lots of things happening with the Senate, where they started trying to rule just for themselves rather than everyone around. So he'd allowed members of the lower classes to gain positions of power and influence, and he wanted things to be much more equal in Rome. He also created lots of new buildings and promoted the arts, and he was a great and much loved emperor because he brought peace and prosperity back to Rome. Our next emperor is Emperor Nero, and he was born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, and he became emperor in AD 54 following the death of his great uncle Claudius. Now, there were very many positive aspects of his rule. For example, he liked to focus on increasing trade and promoting culture. However, Nero is most remembered for his less popular qualities. Claudius's son Britannicus was going to be this emperor after Claudius, so Nero had him poisoned so that he could become the emperor instead. Later, he had his mother and his wife arrested, and he executed them. Then in AD 64, a fire destroyed much of Rome, but instead of helping the people rebuild, Nero had a new palace built for himself. A legend actually went round that while ancient Rome was being burnt down, he was actually standing watching it while playing his fiddle. When the people started blaming him for the fire, he blamed the Christians and started persecuting them. So this is when we start thinking about the idea of Christians being executed in the Colosseum and the like. Our third and final emperor is Emperor Constantine. Caesar Flavius Valerius Aurelius Constantius Augustus is most remembered for being the first Christian emperor. So before a big battle, he had a dream showing him a cross, and he heard a voice saying, "Under this sign you will win." Constantine had all the shields of his army painted with the cross, and sure enough, the battle was won. Constantine was amazed at the power of the Christian God and became a Christian. Until then, Christians had been persecuted in the empire, but now they were able to practice their religion. Constantine also rebuilt the Greek city of Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople. This became the capital of the empire, and today the city is known as Istanbul in Turkey. So in this session we've looked at how ancient Rome was organised, and we've been looking at the difference between the monarchy, the republic and the empire, and identifying some of those different social classes in ancient Rome. So now what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to go off and complete your activity. And what I want you to look at is the different groups of people on our pyramid. And I want you just to write down a little description of who these sort of people are and what their lives would be like. So just a sentence or two, just to explain what slaves are, what a plebeian is, what a patrician is, what a senator would be, what a consul is, and finally, what an emperor would be. And I want you to create me that hierarchical pyramid, as it would be called. Try and include details about what they did for their work, whether or not they could vote, and how much power they had. And then at the end, I want you to think about which group would you have liked to belong to and why. So good luck with your work, and I look forward to seeing it.